If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description.
No rebel talk on my watch. You will evacuate immediately.
I'd rather die than face the authorities. I'm a woman man.
That's why you hang around army barracks, you dimwit.
Well, because I'm wanted by hot curvy babes.
I got a hot curvy euro for your forehead.
As a dude who spent the latter half of his formative years absorbing the weirdest possible shit the early 90s could produce, nothing could possibly have been weirder than the shit being produced over on MTV. Specifically, I'm talking about Liquid Television. Even more specifically, I'm talking about Aeon Flux. And even more specifically, I'm talking about the one scene where the show's protagonist traps a fly in her eyelashes. You know the scene. Ugh, it still haunts me. Anyway, today's Metroidvania is called Anima Flux, and my tiny lizard brain saw the Flux in both titles and was like, is this game an homage to the sci-fi cult classic? After playing through the game, I can confidently say, maybe? If anything, Anima Flux's animation and character designs are reminiscent of the cult cartoon, but other than that, Anima Flux is its own thing. So, what is Anima Flux? It's a solo or co-op science fiction Metroidvania where you play as both Eileen and Roy, two Nox agents tasked with carrying out the orders of Chairman Oliver, who you know you're not going to like because, for starters, she's an authority figure in a science fiction video game, and secondly, she's an authority figure in a science fiction video game with a Karen cut. Regardless, the Nox agents accept the chairman's call and must navigate their way through this mutant-infested facility while extracting VIPs, helping others along the way, and maybe discovering some truths about their strange little utopia gone wrong. It's a great setup, but does it make for a great Metroidvania?
Combat.
Anima Flux's combat was something that had to grow on me, which is a nice way of me saying I didn't like the combat at first. It wasn't until I got my bearings and understood one of the game's core mechanics that I started to dig its combat, which is a nice way of me saying I started liking combat once I stopped sucking and figured out the bounce shot and the stunning attack. In my defense, the game doesn't tell you about these mechanics unless you pause the game and go to the controls menu and learn about them yourself. But once I learned about these skills, the game became far more manageable and engaging. But I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the basics. In single player, you control both Eileen and Roy, one at a time, using a command on the D-pad to instantly swap between the two. The game offers local co-op in case you're fortunate enough to have a buddy who wants to play a roughly 7-hour-long game with you. I didn't try this feature because I don't have friends who live near me, and my daughters didn't want to play a game full of quote-unquote gross mutants. And my wife just straight sucks at video games, so it wasn't about to let her bring me down. So I went solo on this adventure, and I still had a great time. Like I said, you can swap characters quickly and easily, and you can issue a couple of commands to your AI partner, like hold position and follow me. It's simple, but simple is never a dirty word in my vocabulary. Eileen and Roy have different playstyles. Eileen uses a bow and is good for picking off mutants from a safe distance, and Roy is a big dumb idiot who charges into crowds of these monstrosities with only a katana. Because enemies mainly attack in swarms, first impressions might lead players into believing Eileen is the superior combatant thanks to her range. And they'd be right. Roy's up-close and personal style, combined with the lack of any starting defensive maneuvers, means he's going to go blow for blow and ultimately get surrounded before he dies. But playing as Roy isn't as stupid as it sounds once you get his stunning attack down. Matter of fact, once I figured it out, he was my preferred combatant. See, this move, when used properly, is completely broken in all the right ways. It not only stuns all mutants you hit, but Roy's also invulnerable during the attack. So he actually does have a defensive maneuver from the start, it's just also an attack. I can definitely get behind this kind of brokenness. It's not completely broken, you can't spam it because it has a cooldown. Just wait for Roy to explode in a flash of light and you can use the move again. Same with Eileen's bounce shot, but I hardly ever used that. You know what I did use a lot of? Rage. You have this bar up top that fills as you do damage, and when you fill up 4 slots, you can activate Rage Mode, which increases your range and damage output while the meter drains. There are also a few special moves you can unlock that use this rage meter, which adds some engagement to the mechanic. Do I want to hit these mutants with a powerful bow strike, or do I want to reserve my reach until I can activate Rage mode and do some real damage? Adds a risk-reward element to combat. There are some other facets to combat that were fine but didn't work as well as I had hoped. Healing, for instance. You get one medkit per character, and that's it. Once consumed, you have to find a station to buy more medkits. Kits were inexpensive, but searching down a medkit station sucked. Typically, there was a station outside a boss arena, but not all of them. There's this optional boss that has no medkit anywhere near its arena, so losing to him required me to do some ridiculous backtracking to replenish my medkit. This ended up being far worse than any boss run I've ever done. You can also unlock armor in the game that acts like an additional health bar. This was a cool idea, but it just wasn't implemented very well. Once your armor was gone, the only way to get it back was to either hope and pray enemies would drop a buttload of armor icons, which they rarely did, or find some armor station, which was also rare, to replenish your armor. It sucked losing to a boss and having to rematch them with 0 armor because armor replenishments were so hard to come by. There's also secondary weapons you can use for combat and as utility to ungate progress, but they were just like the medkits. You can only hold 3 per character, and once you're done, you have to hunt down a station to replenish them. And these bad boys weren't cheap. Worse yet, you never wanted to use them for combat because what if I need a zap grenade to jumpstart a generator? The FOMO really sets in with these secondary weapons. And FOMO sets in real bad because you can't mark up the map. So coming across something you can use these items on but can't activate because you lack the item sucks, especially hard when you can't also mark down the spot where you need to use the item. And to add insult to injury, as of this video's publication, the map doesn't display where any recharge stations can be found. I don't know, I just really hated this station approach. For instance, you can purchase weapon mods, but you can only change them at certain stations throughout the map. Same with replenishing all the stuff I've mentioned. These stations were placed in the most random and out-of-the-way locations, but why? It was weird and, worst of all, inconvenient. And there's a simple solution. This game has a room you respawn at every time you die, and this room can be accessed in multiple places around the map thanks to a hydraulic tubing system much like one you'd find at a bank drive-thru. Why not just have every single replenishment station in this room? I'd be more comfortable using secondary weapons, the armor suits I paid so much money for would actually be useful, I could change up my weapon mods whenever I pleased, though on second thought, why can't I just do that in the pause menu? I could get medkits whenever, and to top it all off, I would know exactly where these stations would be located at all times, in a single, convenient room that I frequented at least 100 times during my playthrough. I'm no game dev, but I just can't understand why they didn't do this. Is there some kind of design philosophy that's behind why it's actually a good idea to randomly place all these replenishment stations around the map instead of making them conveniently available to the player? I'm not trying to be a dick, I'm genuinely curious as to what the benefit would be for the player. The only thing I can think of is that this makes the game harder. The devs didn't want you to easily regain your armor because it'd make the game too easy. If that's true, then I'd recommend not designing the armor to be so good in the first place. Let's end this section by talking about the bosses. I found the bosses to be pretty challenging. I don't think I took a single boss out in our first encounter, but I also was able to take them out in like 2 or 3 tries, which I think is a solid KD spread for boss fights. Challenging enough to be fun and engaging, but not too challenging to induce embarrassing fits of man-child rage. And that's it for combat. I liked Anima Flux's combat, but I didn't like it at first. There was definitely a learning curve present, especially for Roy, but as you become familiar with the game's mechanics and unlock new abilities, combat starts to feel pretty good. And the swapping characters mechanic is pretty solid as well. I found my partner's AI to be competent and helpful. I kinda wish there was a command that told your partner not to use their rage meter, but it wasn't that big a deal. And I know I went on a diatribe about the replenishment stations, and while I stand behind everything I said, the inconvenience I felt from this design didn't negatively affect my time with Anima Flux, at least not drastically.
Abilities, platforming.
This should be a pretty short section because I've introduced a lot of Anima Flux's abilities already in the combat section, which means the game does something I like with its abilities, and that is, it gives them multiple purposes. In Anima Flux's case, each ability has a combat purpose and a traversal purpose. The chemical grenade can poison mutants for some damage over time, and it can melt steel beams so I can unlock this new path. Same with the electric weapon mod. Zap an enemy or jumpstart a generator to unlock a door. Eileen and Roy also get the tried and true double jump and air dash, both great for traversal and dodging during combat. They also get a few special moves that do damage as well as other things, like the ground pound destroying debris clogging up vertical tunnels. All in all, they get some cool stuff, but nothing I'd consider unique or interesting. Everything they do, you've seen in an MV before. The platforming is fine, not a whole lot noteworthy here, but that's to be expected from an MV with a heavy focus on combat. I'd like to warn you that there are some insta-kill pits and traps. These things don't bother me too much, but boy, have I come across MV gamers who absolutely hate insta-kill stuff in their MVs. So much so that they cite insta-kill obstacles as a reason for me to lower games on my tier list. I don't know, like I said, not an issue for me, but apparently it is for some of you. So, Anima Flux has insta-kill stuff in it. Plan accordingly. Anima Flux also has a lot of quote-unquote puzzles, and by puzzles, I mean locked doors that can only be unlocked by killing everything in a room or by flipping a switch. Most of Anima Flux's puzzling you'll find in its level design, which I thought in large part was pretty good. Lots of labyrinthine areas and one-way doors and elevators between areas. I'm not the biggest fan of elevator level design where biomes are a bunch of areas connected by a series of elevators, but it didn't bother me too much. There's no reason for me to dislike this approach. It's a perfectly viable design choice. I'm just weird. I do want to shout out one puzzle that I thought was exceptional, and that's the presses puzzle. The presses is the name of a biome, and within said biome, you'll find the titular presses. What makes this puzzle so amazing is that it essentially spans the entirety of the game's latter half. There are 3 series of presses, each with their own geometric label. These presses move too fast for you to traverse through without getting flattened, and so Eileen and Roy must find the control console to slow these presses down. But wouldn't you know it, the console doesn't have enough power, forcing the duo to scour the biome for 3 breakers so they can slow down all 3 kinds of presses. What makes this puzzle interesting is that for each breaker switched, you get 1 unit of power, meaning you could slow down 1 set of presses. And when you switch 2 breakers, this allows you to slow down 2 sets of presses. Juggling between which presses you needed to slow down and when was a lot of fun, and the overall design was very interesting. Like I mentioned, this puzzle spans pretty much the latter half of the game, or at least it did with how my playthrough went. And I was altering between the presses so I could dip in and out of other biomes in order to not only advance to these biomes, but to circumnavigate the presses I wasn't able to slow down yet. It was all very intriguing and well made. I really had a lot of fun with the presses puzzle. And that's it for this section. Familiar abilities, mediocre platforming with insta-kill obstacles, and lots of elevators.
Progression.
I feel like progression in Anima Flux is a big secret. Like, the game wants to hide the fact that your character can increase their stats, and I don't know why I feel this way. I feel like it might be because so many shops are hidden behind side quests. There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, it made the side quests feel all the more impactful. And I don't think I've ever been more efficient than I was in this section's intro. Check this out. You already know you can increase stats, there are side quests, and there are shops indicating that this game has an economy. Man, if I was always this efficient, I'd get so much more shit done. So yeah, you kill stuff, collect purple orbs called biomatter, and spend them at all the shops you unlock through the various side quests. There's a good amount of side quests here, and lots to buy. You can improve your map, buy armor, buy secondary weapons, and a plethora of other things. I don't want to spoil everything for you. What you won't find in this game is a leveling system or a skill tree. But one could argue amassing biomaterial is just like gathering XP because you use them to improve your character. To these people, I say, shut up, you know what I meant. And that'll do it for progression. Keep your eyes peeled for NPCs and doors, especially in the game's hub area. I legit overlooked a door and missed out on a lot of sweet stuff I could have used much sooner in the game. And make sure you complete those side quests. Ignoring them means you won't be able to improve your characters.
Exploration.
I don't know what it is about this review, but I feel like I've been all over the place. Most of what I wanted to talk about in this section, I've already brought up in other sections. The in-game map is fine, but it doesn't allow you to mark things up. Replenishment stations are randomly placed and inconvenient, and there are elevators everywhere that link areas together to create biomes. Sometimes it's tough to compartmentalize when the compartments keep touching each other. What else can I say about exploration? I found it rewarding. There are lots of hidden nooks and crannies, things to discover, and side quests to embark on. And the game really likes to abilities. And if you don't know what that is, it's when MV devs design their levels with lots of obstacles that can only be overcome with certain abilities. Get it? I tell you, I actually fist pumped when I finally found the double jump. It was the last ability I found, which I think is unusual because you should be able to acquire it mid-game. But my entire approach to Anima Flux was unusual. I was really off my MV game. I was constantly getting stuck and lost. This game puts 0 objective markers on the map and does not hold your hand, which I absolutely loved. I was able to figure everything out. I even found all the secret messages on my own, but it was a struggle. I missed a whole biome at the very beginning of the game because I overlooked a door in the hub area. I don't know what it is about MV worlds with elevator designs. I think all the boxy areas being connected by straight lines reminds me too much of the Visio charts I use at work. And my brain just shuts off because Visio charts are boring. Well, there's that, and for some reason I just don't look for doors in the background to enter. It's a very stupid and specific weakness I have. As for the game's actual biomes, I thought they were well designed, and I liked their diversity. You got a lab, a city, a sewer, the aforementioned presses and its exceptional puzzle, and an infected barracks. Good stuff that interconnected in interesting ways. I also want to state overtly that the game becomes very non-linear in the latter half, hence why I found the double jump later than I should. The moment the game opened up is when I really lost my bearings. Chairman Oliver's like, find these 3 people, and then pieces out without even a whisper of a hint. It's like if that statue in Hollow Knight that informs you about the Dreamers didn't place any objective markers on your map. In Anima Flux, Eileen and Roy are just stuck there like, alright then. This didn't bother me because I like being lost in an MV, and it's not like Anima Flux's map is gigantic, though it is a respectable size. Plus, there's a fast travel system with these large elevators. They were fine enough. Most led to really close points of interest, and that was very much appreciated. I guess that's it for exploration. Overall, exploration was fun. It could have been more rewarding by offering players more things to discover, but those things would most likely be things that improve your character's stats, and that would have taken away from the side quests and the shops, so I guess it all balances out in the end. I would have really appreciated being able to mark up the map, because trying to remember where all these spots where I was being abilitiesed is getting tougher and tougher as I get older.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
Anima Flux takes place in a mutant-ravaged hellscape in a world ruled by a theocratic, dictatorial regime where Big Brother is always watching, where those who talk ill of the regime are met with harsh punishment. Yet, there are still rebels in the seedy outskirts of society who long for the truth and what's really happening in their world. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Too bad all that information's found in easily missable messages hidden throughout the world. That's definitely a game world I'd love to experience. I'm half kidding. Though a lot of what I described in this section's opening is hidden away, the part that's blatantly shoved in your face is the mutant-ravaged hellscape. Just about everywhere you go in Anima Flux looks like a slaughterhouse. Often you'll be exploring and see the remains of some poor dude slumped against a wall in the background or a bloody trail. And the game does a really good job of making you feel like you're part of an organization trying to evacuate citizens. The hub area is rife with NPCs milling about or doing their tasks, and the save room is full of scientists monitoring the situation. All in all, I really love how this game looks and feels. From its desolate city biome to the imposing locked door you find under the lab, there's a lot of detail to be found in the environments. I also liked the music. You all know I'm not a music guy, but the music here sounded appropriate. I really liked its ambient synthwave during exploration. It kinda took me back to the 80s, and the battle music was appropriately upbeat. The cutscenes were an absolute delight. They're few and far between, but every single one felt like a treat. The animation reminded me of stuff I watched in the 80s and early 90s, and if that was what they were going for, then all I can say is that they nailed it. As for the narrative, I liked it. I liked Eileen and Roy's back and forth, with Eileen playing the straight-laced officer with only the mission in mind, and Roy being her crass, irreverent counterpart. It was fun watching them bicker during boss fights and quip after boss fights, and pick on each other after they resurrected at the Animachine. The two didn't develop too much as individual characters, but the relationship between the two blossomed. They both did start opening up to each other eventually. I would have liked to have had that explored much more. I think those fast travel elevator rides would have been a good time to have the characters interact with each other. The ending, of which there was only one, confused the shit out of me. It was fun to watch because I loved the animation style, but it was so bizarre. I had no clue what was going on. It wasn't until I actually read the secret messages I had been decoding the entire game that I realized what was happening. Some of the game's revelations you'll see coming, while others will probably blow your mind. You just have to be willing to read it instead of experience it.
Final thoughts and score.
Anima Flux was a bit of a roller coaster for me. The combat started out rough, with some learning curves around key mechanics like the bounce shot and Roy's stunning attack. But once I got the hang of those, things picked up. Swapping characters was smooth, and I liked how it added variety, and though the game is co-op, I still had a lot of fun going solo. There were some design choices I found irritating, like needing to hit up randomly placed replenishment stations to refill your armor and ammo, but it didn't detract too much from the experience. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed Anima Flux. I award Anima Flux a 7.5 out of 10. Anima Flux is available for PC and is coming to Switch, PS5, and the Xbox Series X and S in the near future. I played Anima Flux on my Steam Deck with zero issues. The text was a little small, but it was nothing a little squinting couldn't fix. I give Anima Flux the Steam Deck rating of playable.
Tier placement.
Anima Flux is a pretty good MV. I think it's a little above average. Its combat took some getting used to, but I came around and really appreciated the whole swapping shtick. And I thought its atmosphere was great and its narrative was pretty good. The whole resource management thing with the armor and secondary weapons was kind of obnoxious, and I think the game played it a little too safe for its own good. The abilities on offer were a little too bland, and the platforming suffered for it. Anima Flux swaps itself into the upper C tier. Anima Flux is a good Metroidvania you should consider taking for a spin. It took me about 7 hours to complete it, and I enjoyed it. If you can, grab yourself a friend and spend a weekend or a long night eviscerating mutants and learning that your government will do the most heinous things to maintain its power. Listen to me. Do not ascend. Do not ascend. They're using us to... FBI, open up! Hey, what are you doing? Get up!